The All Elite Podcast. Covering all the latest news and results from the AEW.
Wait a minute. Sean Spears? Spears with a chair shot right to the side of the head of Cody.
This is pro wrestling analysis as you've never heard before.
Deathly Hallows!
Might be it.
1, 2, 3, Kasabian!
Coming to you every single week. So without any further delay, let's go all in and get the show started right now.
Hello and welcome everybody to AEW Dynamite AFTERSHOCK. I'm your host Zach Perez at Spots High on Twitter is where you can find me. And another week of AEW on Wednesday night television here on TNT. And again, another great wrestling show. Consistency seems to be the calling card for AEW, and fittingly so, given what they promised and wanting to change the wrestling world, so to speak. So far, so good. And 10 days removed from, or 10 days leading to the Full Gear pay-per-view in Baltimore. A little bit of a slower paced show this week, a little bit less action-packed, a little more of the traditional television style, I guess you could say, what you're accustomed to, a little less pay-per-view-esque in a lot of ways. But still a very good wrestling show. I think still delivered more in 2 hours than Raw did in 3 for probably, ever since AEW got onto television, really. So that's just my opinion, of course. Everybody's going to have a differing one. But addressing that, I do want to say, I think that it's kind of crazy how much people hate AEW for some reason. They seem to come at it sideways, want to say all sorts of bad things about other WWE cast-offs. But I think that, everybody should be wanting a promotion like AEW to grow. Having the side-by-side competition to WWE and putting something up against them for the first time in a strong way since, probably, if you're not counting TNA, since WCW went out of business. So it's something that will help wrestling grow and will help make both products better. But I think that the fans have to let it be that way and let the wrestling do the talking and not which company is putting out the product. And, you should kind of look at it as if you're watching each event and each pay-per-view without the branding on it, kind of a blind taste test, if you will. So I think that's worth taking with a grain of salt, as you will. But, all in all, I think that you should look at all of the different wrestling products that are out there, be it Impact finally on a watchable television network, or NWA with Power on YouTube, and now MLW has got their own show, I believe. So, just all sorts of wrestling available out there that you can watch. So you can find what best suits you and just go out there and support it and be bipartisan in what you think is good wrestling and supporting just what attracts you as a wrestling fan, not just what sticker is on there or what logo it has. So with that being said, let's move on right into the main event here, because there is something that I think is worth addressing right off top with what happened in the main event, and in particular the finish of the main event. So that being said, there was a championship on the line here. The tag titles were being decided for the first time here, and it was the culmination of the tag team tournament. I think it was kind of a rather odd placement to have this be the end of the tag tournament. I feel like it was a little rushed. I think they could have probably fleshed it out over at least one more week, given that they have Full Gear next Saturday. So, giving it a little more space probably would have been best, but I can still, you can't really argue with the results, with how good of a matchup that SCU and the Lucha Bros put on here. But the finish did kind of bring up a big problem, not just in AEW, just in wrestling as a whole, which was the small package did end up getting the victory here, and I wouldn't be doing my job as somebody giving their opinion if I didn't state, just how much that bothers me in wrestling nowadays, where the roll-up or the small package or whatever it is just used as kind of a booking outlet to decide the victor without really giving a clean victory and making it something you can kind of come back to and say, yeah, they won, but they won in this fashion and not this way. And I just think that it's kind of become a little bit of a lazy lean-on option, and just all around in wrestling, I've gotten kind of tired of it, and it's no exception here. I didn't like the fact that you had such a competitive contest end in that way. I do think that the small package, the roll-up, can be used in a strategic way in a wrestling match to kind of put things over as being a smart move, something that you can really actually look at as a legitimate wrestling maneuver, something that you would really actually lean on and want to do in a wrestling match if you were trying to get the victory. But, that being said, it's not that this wasn't that. It's just rather the fact that I've seen it a little bit too much. I've already seen it a little bit in AEW, and I just don't want that to become a commonplace, because I think especially for the first tag team title match, I think that we probably would have rather had a clean finish, something that was very definitive and said this tag team is the most dominant tag team in the division, especially because it's already so packed full of talent. So I think kind of making somebody the king of the hill and kind of pushing somebody down a little bit, but in a very spectacular fashion, as would have been the case with this great match, I think that would have been a little bit of a better choice, and probably would have done a little bit more for the tag titles right off the bat, and a little bit more for this tag division that has been so spectacular and has clearly been the forefront of what AEW is trying to do. But, just all around a little lackluster for the build up to this, given that it was just on a television instead of a pay-per-view card. But still very action-packed. We had some crazy spots, a monkey flip double clothesline by Kazarian that looked ridiculous. Of course, the Lucha Bros doing insane spots as they usually do. Rey Fenix at one point jumped off the top rope, landed on the middle rope, kind of split-legged, and jumped over and did an arm drag. It was just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the man is just constantly inventing new ways to kind of throw his body around a wrestling ring in an impressive fashion, and it's just kind of like they're inventing moves that don't even have accurate descriptions as of yet. But like I said, all of this was great, nothing to complain about in terms of what happened in the match, except for the way that the finish was booked, which is just a little bit unfortunate given how great both tag teams performed here, and given the build up to this tag tournament and how well I think all of the matches have been. I think that things being a little more spaced out and things being performed a little more with a big fight feel on a pay-per-view setting would have done a lot of good here. But that's something that the promotion will learn. They're very young, of course, so I think they'll kind of get that timing right in terms of the formula of when to let the goods out and kind of let the bigger matches happen. And this was definitely a match that could have done with a little bit more time, maybe even allowing for Christopher Daniels to return and kind of have his stamp on it and get SCU the tag titles or something like that. Would have been a good choice here. But, beggars can't be choosers, so to speak, and all in all, nothing to complain about in terms of how the match was, and still always 5-star matches between the Lucha Bros and SCU, and just anytime they're getting involved in AEW contests, they're putting on a show, as is the case with most everybody on the roster, but in particular the Lucha Bros. They've just been the constant in this division and the constant on this roster for just blockbuster, insane action that, could probably main event just about any card anywhere outside of AEW, and probably could even be huge stars in WWE but at the same time they would be a watered down version of the insane in-ring competitors that they are. So I think that they're right at home in AEW and on the grandest stage they can be with how hot AEW is and the million or so viewers that they're reeling in each week. We'll see how this week does with, I think the World Series was going up against it today, so definitely gonna knock the ratings a little bit if that's the case. But regardless of that, this show still performed, as did the main event that was the feature of it. But once again, still worth saying that the finish did overshadow it just a little bit, and I would have rather seen something clean to end this tag tournament in a more kind of respectable fashion, so to speak. But jumping back up to the top of the card, we had a very nice, interesting, technical sort of bout to start things off between Adam Page and Sammy Guevara. Probably a little bit different flavor than what people would expect. Kind of interestingly combated the spot fest talk that people always want to say about AEW, it seems, where they're saying, things are just constant high flying all over the ring, nobody's selling any of the huge moves, and pile drivers and people getting dropped on their neck, dropped on the apron, and nobody's selling. They're just popping back up like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, something like that. Nobody's ever actually getting injured by the crazy spots that are going on. But I think this was a good counter to that argument with the technicality that we saw, the good back and forth, constant countering action between Adam and Sammy here. And, speaking of the apron, there was a sidewalk slam on the apron that looked really vicious, and there was a power bomb actually that followed it that was actually probably just as potent in terms of the selling and the way it looked and the polish on it. So both men came out of this looking very, very good, as is the case with almost all the singles contests in AEW. They do a great job of booking it kind of in a wild way where everybody just kind of lets loose like it's a pay-per-view match, and everybody's just trying to make each other look as good as possible, and there's a lot of give and take, and nobody's really ever overly dominant, and everybody gets to kind of taste a little bit of the spotlight that comes with being on television for the first time as a young promotion. And to that point, it is worth saying to me that AEW kind of reminds me of what really makes me love wrestling and what made me really love ECW, which is that, it gets a reputation for being one type of wrestling. Like I said, the spot fest, the constant action, being way over the top, overbooking every match, and just too much for some people, I guess. The Jim Cornettes of the world, are just, kind of have a heart attack at the sight of the kind of car crash-esque matches that people describe it as in AEW. But really, AEW has that nice balance that ECW was able to achieve as well, where you'd have some really crazy, over-the-top, hardcore matches on the card, but at the same time you'd have people like Benoit, Malenko, people who could really, have these technical contests inside of the ring. You could even say Jerry Lynn and Rob Van Dam, some of the matches that they had there. There's just, there was always a little bit of everything for every fan beyond just the extreme that brought people in. And I think that's kind of a pattern that you see developing in AEW too, where they're taking their quote-unquote extreme, and they're pushing that as their main flavor, but they also have a lot of other things going on. It's almost like if you were to compare AEW or ECW to a soda, they would be Dr. Pepper. You know, they have all the flavors going on. It's just a little bit of everything for anybody, and you can see that and experience that just about every time that you put the channel on. And that was very similar to the way that ECW's television product was. So kudos to them for achieving that almighty balance that's always key in the wrestling industry, and I think will be key to them growing and continuing to maintain this fan base they have developed so far. But we did have Adam pick up the victory here, getting a really nice buckshot lariat to finish the match, sold beautifully by Sammy. It looked like he took his neck apart and finished the match up with that. You know, good simple match to open things up with. Then we ended up leading into Hangman doing a promo, which was simple, effective, clearly not scripted, not too forced, just to the point. You know, you had him saying that he's going to do some real cowboy shit. Then you had cowboy shit chants ensue right after that. Hyping Full Gear up very well, getting people set. You know, again, only 10 days away. Got one more show as the go-home show before it. So I think that they're doing a good job of kind of threading things together and kind of getting people excited and trying to get that viewership up for that event. So good to see that they've kind of got things figured out when it comes to building up to that, and by doing it in a way where they're not scripting their performers is a very, again, interesting and hard to achieve balance that I think that they've managed to do very well so far, kind of walking the tightrope right along to Full Gear. So great promo by Adam Page and great opening matchup. Leading into the next matchup, which was Shanna, a quote-unquote Portugal's perfect athlete, her very first contest in AEW, going up against Hikaru Shida. And I immediately had one point worth making, and that's just Hikaru Shida's entrance music was just so high-pitched, so odd, and kind of long-winded with the intro, and everybody kind of just froze there and didn't know really how to react as it went on. And I don't know if it was just the audio translation to television, the high-pitchedness, the fact that it may be because I had a migraine while I was watching it, or what it was, but it just was very piercing and kind of off-putting. So I don't know, maybe they'll address that down the line, but you know, that is where you kind of see some of the seams, so to speak, and see that AEW is a younger company than WWE and doesn't have all of the production at its disposal. As good as they do most of the time, every once in a while you'll have these kind of little slip-ups, and they're just worth mentioning so that things can get better. Once again, hopefully everything, just all in all, gets better for wrestling, not just AEW, not just WWE, but the wrestling industry going forward. But this matchup was very good pace. I think that the AEW women's division has been very consistent in what it delivers. Kind of the women's, the average women's pay-per-view match in WWE is basically what you get for the most part when you're watching any AEW women's wrestlers. So some good back and forth action. Once again, in singles competition, AEW plays that balancing game of letting each competitor get enough actual offense in there to look like a legitimate threat and be sold as such. So good dueling back and forth counter pin maneuver moment where they were both on the ground and it was shifting back and forth between Shanna then to Karu, and just both of them doing different pinning predicaments and kind of getting the quick one count, then the shift, then the 1 count and so on and so forth. But great selling throughout this contest as well, and I think that's another thing that AEW gets a little bit of unfair criticism for, especially actually in the women's division. There's been a lot of consistent good selling that's kind of put people over and made the maneuvers look very painful, and really sold the idea that we're trying to make this look like a legitimate sport kind of presentation, just beyond what most people consider pro wrestling, and making things look a little bit more real and giving it that sort of aesthetic. So I think the selling is going to be a major part of that if they do want to sell it as such, like with the wins and loss records and having that be involved in there. So I think that the selling really is kind of undervalued in All Elite Wrestling so far, and I think this company has done a great job across the board. You look at earlier the matchup with Sammy Guevara, his selling in that contest, that buckshot lariat finish, him doing kind of that corkscrew lariat sell. So I think that it's something that's overstated, that it's a problem in AEW, and I think it's actually undervalued and is one of the strengths, especially when it comes to the female competitors. But some great spots in this. You had Hikaru set a chair up on the outside and do a running knee, which looked picture perfect, kind of akin to Sabu over in ECW, another little ECW call out as I tend to lean on. But then you also had diving double foot stop by Shanna to Hikaru Shida in the kind of tree of woe position that looked very convincing for a near fall. Could have been easily sold as a finish for the match, so kind of had me a little on edge there as well. We might actually see a quick interesting victory for her first contest, but that did not end up being the case, and a nice running knee did end up giving Hikaru the finish. All in all, a good but not great contest. Again, kind of the standard has been more the WWE pay-per-view quality women's matches, but this one was maybe more akin to a typical SmackDown or Raw performance, maybe on the higher end of that still, maybe something kind of similar to that tag that we saw with Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair recently. But, the quality of wrestling was still there, but just not as kind of action-packed and fast-paced as you kind of got used to. And, in the first hour, it was kind of lingering just a little bit, not kind of hitting as hard as it has in previous weeks. So it's worth mentioning, but once again, everything is still clicking, everything is still working. It's just a matter of making sure that the hype stays as high consistently each week. But, nothing wrong with slowing the pace down a little bit and in the same breath. So you can definitely see that's kind of what they did with this show across the board. Next week will be the go-home show before Full Gear, so probably will be a little more amped up. So maybe kind of consider this kind of the bye week, the rest week, so to speak, a little bit of filler. But, if this is the filler, then they're doing things very, very right over in All Elite Wrestling. So happy to be watching and being a part of this so far. But I digress. After this matchup, we did lead into a segment with Brandy Rhodes, and I thought last week her backstage attack sort of thing came across as very odd, but this segment redeemed it very well. Don't know exactly what they're capitalizing on, what they're trying to say beyond, kind of just showing off the fact that it's Halloween, doing this kind of spooky inspired segment with Awesome Kong, showing her maybe that she is still involved with the company. I don't know, maybe it was never confirmed. I don't know if that's what they were trying to say here, is that she is going to be a part of the company going forward. But Brandy donning a little black veil hat thing and kind of giving the all around Halloween vibes with the with the segment's production here, and good production value, good sort of special effect moments, and simple, straightforward sort of segment that didn't do a whole lot, but definitely builds up the idea that Awesome Kong is going to be coming back at some point, and that's going to be a big part of what Brandy Rhodes does going forward. So simple little bit of storytelling, didn't take up too much time, didn't do too much, didn't drive things too forward. Could have probably done a little bit more with this, but simple, good segment that just kind of progressed the show along and kind of explained what was going on from last week with Brandy. It's good they don't just kind of drop things and abandon them if they don't work, like tends to be the case over in WWE land there. But right after that, we had Chris Van Vliet announcing the Rock and Roll Express. Of course, Robert Gibson and Ricky Morton. Robert Gibson actually 61 years old. Ricky Morton now 63 years old. Debuted in 1983 as a tag team, so wrestling for 36 years together. They just recently wrestled in New Japan, and they ended up, I think, capturing gold over in NWA, if I'm not mistaken, tag team gold over there. So very interesting to see that they're still kicking, both figuratively and literally. So great to see them come out and present the AEW tag belts here, and kind of respect the fact that a lot of what they did kind of paved the way for guys like the Young Bucks and SCU and the Lucha Bros to be the kind of fast-paced, crazy style that they are. So they kind of made that a little more common and made that a little more mainstream in a time where that wasn't so much the case. So good to see that kind of callback and a little bit of shouting out to the style of wrestling that they did and letting them be the ones to kind of be the bearer of those titles. But all of that was a little bit of a red herring, as we did end up having them get attacked by Santana and Ortiz, formerly LAX, now Proud and Powerful. I finally convinced my mind to keep that as a fact. Now also part of the Inner Circle, of course, with Chris Jericho and Sammy Guevara. But they kind of brutalized the Rock and Roll Express here. Looked a little especially vicious given the aforementioned age difference. So they looked very much like they were beating up on the older competitors here. And the lifting powerbomb looked vicious that they did through the section of the stage there. Very reminiscent of Bubba Ray putting Mae Young through the table, jumping off the stage. I believe it was on SmackDown, probably 10, 12 years ago at this point. But very reminiscent of that moment where he jumped off the stage and drove her through the tables and kind of had that blank, expressionless stare off into space and eye rolling back. But I really thought that this was sold really well, really gave Santana and Ortiz some great heel heat. Made them look very vicious. You had them using a sock with something in it, kind of very prison yard-esque in their style of beatdown. So that was very well done and definitely made things look very, very damaging and very much like they were in a street brawl out there looking to inflict some punishment on some unsuspecting victims. So sold that mugging of the Rock and Roll Express very well, and going through that section of the stage was a great little spot, and just once again speaks to how crazy it is that they're still wrestling and still able to take those kind of falls and bumps and come out of it the other side still ready to wrestle next week. So shout out to a great performance and a great segment here, and then another one to follow it right after with Cody and Tony Schiavone. You had Tony telling a story about Dusty Rhodes where he walked into his hotel room to find him completely buck naked sitting on the bed there, and just a nice little back and forth with them, talking about how he gave him a piece of advice saying that to make him wait and that the stars always come last. So a nice little callback to Dusty Rhodes, and a nice little kind of cutaway, kind of realistic feeling segment with Cody to lead into the eventual contract signing that'll happen later on in the night. We'll get to that later, but after that little segment, we led into a little squash match between Alex Reynolds, Adam Silver, and QT Marshall. I want to make sure I get all the jobbers' names right. But then they went up against the Best Friends with Orange Cassidy, and this is where the Rick and Morty tie-in came in, and I do have to say I'm a little disappointed with the lack of Rick and Morty here. I did see the turnbuckles and the pads and everything all Rick and Morty'd, and they did end up doing kind of a entrance announcement for the Best Friends in Orange Cassidy, but you know, the fact that they announced there was going to be some Rick and Morty crossover, I would have liked to see them explore that a little more. Although seeing JR say "Wubba Lub Dub" was absolutely priceless, and probably made my night and made my year maybe of 2019, just to hear that moment and how meta that was to have two of my favorite things kind of come together like that. As a matter of fact, to give you an idea how much I like Rick and Morty, I actually have the same exact Rick costume that Orange Cassidy was in tonight, so that was pretty funny to see that, especially, you know, a day removed from Halloween where I might just end up in that costume once again. So it was pretty funny to see that happen, but I would have liked them to explore it just a little bit more. You know, I guess people will either love the type of crossover where it's, you know, they'll be fans of the show and they'll appreciate that, or maybe not even be fans of the show, but just appreciate the kind of crossover between two different shows, two different types of media. But other people will hate it. You know, you can't please everybody. It's just the nature of the business when you're in this type of industry. So I think that I loved it. I personally am a big fan of Rick and Morty, so I would have liked to see that even expanded out more and kind of have them have been a bigger part of the show. Maybe kind of like how Chucky talked back in WCW, one of those infamous WCW moments from back in the day, leading actually, I think, into one of the Halloween Havoc pay-per-views. But regardless, this matchup was a nice little quick squash. The Best Friends looked very good, as they always do. Trent with a nice little tornado DDT off the top rope that stuck out in my mind. You know, all throughout they were in the Rick and Morty costumes. You had Morty, you had Trent as Morty, I should say, and then Orange Cassidy and Chuck Taylor both donning the Rick eyebrow and hair combination, of course, with the lab coat also. But all in all, just did a great job of putting the Best Friends and Orange Cassidy over. A simple, good play on Halloween as well. We'll see a little more of that coming up later on. But a nice little spot where the ref put the broken sunglasses back on Orange Cassidy as he got involved in the match. That was great. Just think that character is a great character that will do very well, especially with a younger market. I mean, you see Tony Khan and Jerry Lynn both dressed up as Orange Cassidy for Halloween. There was a nice little photo shoot they did with him recently. So if you've got those two names on your side dressing up as you, and you got that one kid that took the pinfall victory over Cody after the show went off the air the other night, dressed up as Orange Cassidy. So it speaks to, I think, how magnetizing he is and how charismatic that character is and how well he plays it. And I think it'll continue to build up and continue to bubble on that, and probably will sell a lot of merchandise and continue to get more and more popular. And like I said, probably even more so with the younger market as they bring a sort of younger demographic into AEW, sort of a afterthought of what they're doing, trying to deliver on the hardcore fans. But I think that'll be a key to growing their business in the future. So having things like Orange Cassidy will do that. I know Jim Cornette is probably somewhere having a heart attack once again, but I definitely think Orange Cassidy has a place in wrestling, and the gimmick is very smart and will continue to grow in popularity and continue to be a driving force in AEW's Wednesday night television product. But the Best Friends ended up, of course, taking the victory here, and that ended up wrapping up a pretty solid contest. A little bit more of that kind of pace that I was expecting from what I've seen with AEW so far. A little, believe this kind of capped off the hour mark, maybe bled over a little bit, but just made things a little more interesting, made things a little more of that entertainment factor that you get with WWE. So a good crossover of both while delivering a little bit of kind of a dual-edged sword quality to it. So all in all, good segment / match, whatever you'd like to call it, I guess. But this ended up leading into the contract signing between Chris Jericho and Cody for the Full Gear pay-per-view. Always kind of interesting to me that, they leave these quote-unquote contract signings, right up before the event, 10 days removed. It's like, what happens if somebody doesn't sign, then the match just doesn't happen and everybody gets a refund. It's always one of those interesting little loopholes that never gets discussed in wrestling, but it's part of the fun. You can't always look behind the curtain too much, otherwise it ruins and you start seeing the seams pull apart everywhere. But this was a nice segment. Jericho came out with a sort of Halloween-inspired jacket, very Halloween Havoc-esque in a way, had all the different faces on the pumpkins carved out, purple and orange, and just very vibrant, very much akin to his personality. He ended up pretending to flip the table later on at Cody. A great little subtle shot at the WWE contract signings where they always seem to ending in a power bomb through a table, as Jericho mentioned later in his promo, but just always seems to end in some sort of melee, so a nice little call out to that, very simply alluding to it, both in that little moment and then also with his promo work after that. But also a little interesting thing to note that Cody did have Jericho kind of wait there, alluding back to the earlier moment where he was in the car with Tony Schiavone talking about Dusty Rhodes and being the star and making, being the last one to enter. So that was a nice little call to that as well. And then we ended up having Jericho call for Cody's handshake at the end, which ended up, of course, being a ploy, being Jericho being the ultimate heel that he always is, always erring on the side of bad. This ended up leading into kind of Cody pulling him in tight and kind of giving him that kind of gangster stare down, giving him the mad dog eyes and basically trying to hype up the match. But then we had Jericho pull the ace out of his sleeve and show the footage of Jake Hager assaulting Dustin after saying, that you're needed elsewhere rather than trying to whoop my ass, basically is how that went. And so Jake Hager was just beating the piss out of Dustin, looked great. He ended up smacking his head up against the back fender and leaving a dent there. I don't know if the dent was already there beforehand, but was sold like he dented it with his skull. So that's always a good little thing when you can dent something with a skull in wrestling. It definitely sells it as looking a little bit painful, very simply to say. So this was a nice little beatdown segment, very kind of Lesnar-esque in the way they've approached Jake Hager, and that they're just kind of showing him be the monster, beating down people, being the mega heel, just somebody that you hate simply for his presence and who he's attacking, and kind of being the loose cannon, kind of big monster heel. So I think he plays that role very well, and I think it's very funny how he comes from having like a 10-year run in WWE, and it already seems like he's a bigger player now with his short stint in AEW without even having wrestled a match yet. He already feels like a bigger deal, already feels like he's more towards the top of the card than he ever has. So kind of speaks to the booking, I'd say, of AEW and the way they treat their wrestlers. So Jake Hager is a perfect example of kind of the trash to treasure mindset, I guess you could say. I don't want to say that in any offense to him. He's a great talent. I think, I saw him at a Northeast Wrestling show, as I've said in the past, and his captivation of the crowd is second to none, really. He just connects with people. He has that bond, and the We the People will never die, even though Jericho tried to put a stake through its heart the other week. But Hager has done great things with AEW, and this segment was no different. Then you ended up actually having Jericho and Cody come into frame. Cody doing the save, and Jericho getting into his vehicle, lighting a cigar, and getting in the SUV, feeling very much like a supervillain. And, one of the interesting things I was thinking was the fact that they didn't show the actual live arena, so I wonder if Cody got out of the ring in time to make it look like sell it properly, or if it was done live where he managed to get out there, because it seemed like it was pretty far out. At least it must have been into the parking lot area, so rather quick to make his way out there if that was the case. So but didn't detract from this otherwise great angle, but I think that the ending did save it a bit. I think it was kind of dragging along a little bit. There wasn't really enough heat between Jericho and Cody in their verbal exchange, so I think the ending with Jake Hager really was necessary to build things up a little bit more. And I think in this feud in particular, kind of not letting the talking do so much of the battling here, but more so the physical confrontations is a much better way to deliver this. So I think it's kind of good that it's coming to a head at Full Gear. Interesting to see who will come out victorious there. I do think that they'll keep the belt on Jericho, just because it makes sense right now. It makes sense to kind of leave Cody fighting for it, especially because people are looking at him as this huge hero. He gets a huge pop every time he comes out, very much like a big hero who's leading the ship here in AEW, so he doesn't really need the belt at the moment, and I think leaving it on somebody for a nice long period of time will feel good. But that's just my early prediction. I'll probably have another prediction show or something like that leading into Full Gear as it comes along here in 10 days. But that's just my early take on what I think will go down with that AEW championship. But I'm very much looking forward to it. I think Cody and Jericho may very well steal the show, probably second behind Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega. But a very good segue, as a matter of fact, as we ended up having the Elite take on Angelico and Jack Evans, now known as the Hybrid 2. They were pairing up, or trioing up, with Kip Sabian, and we had a beautiful little old school video game opening for the Elite to lead into this match, which was just so epic and so cool. And you had the little text blurb noises as the text came across the screen, and it just felt very much to the sort of arcade video game days, and just a nice little call out to the geekier side of the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. Then you ended up having Kenny Omega come out dressed as Sans from Undertale, and the Young Bucks coming out as Ryu and Ken, and just nice little call to the fact that this company is a little bit more free for their wrestlers, probably more so being, the fact that they are the Elite and they are a big presence in the company, but just letting them come out and kind of be themselves and showcase that, especially a day before Halloween, to kind of come out in costume, as we saw earlier in the night as well. I think that was very, very refreshing and very nice to see them kind of embrace that and be a little bit more whimsical, I guess you could say, with their approach and their attire for the night. But if you were to be complaining, as I was a little bit, about the pace of the action of the night, this match was like a firecracker lit off. It was just non-stop from the beginning, just constant offense. Kenny Omega hitting this sort of double move moment where he launched up and kind of hit the Famouser combination against, I think it was both Angelico and Jack Evans. That looked beautiful. Just so many crazy spots, constantly innovating and doing some ridiculous things. Jack Evans looked fantastic in this match. I think he's one of the most underrated and undervalued high flyers of probably all time, or at least of this generation. I mean, the things that he did in ROH, Wrestling Society X even, and now the things that he's doing in AEW, he just continues to be a ridiculous high flyer. Some would call him a spot monkey. I call him one of my favorite high-flying wrestlers, and just continues to entertain and has had a long, illustrious career of doing so. So kind of a good showing out party, especially for maybe a TV audience that's not as familiar as I am with Jack Evans' work. So seeing him have that spotlight in this match and show out against the much more popular Elite was a very nice little showcase. He did end up taking the loss later on, but he sold his ass off in doing so, taking a great one-winged angel. But there were some great moves throughout this match, all out. Sabian ended up getting caught by the Elite in a power bomb off of a springboard senton, where all three of them caught him, kind of like a crowd surfing moment. Some great Hurricane Ranas throughout, a sort of Frankensteiner Hurricane Rana spot by Sabian where he jumped over the rope and led into that. So some great crisp offense, capped off by that one-winged angel that Jack Evans took to end up giving the Elite the victory. You can definitely tell they're trying to put all of their trajectories up a bit, kind of sell them more as big contenders after they've all kind of been doing a little bit of the giving game to start off their time in the company. So that'll probably be a trend that continues, and I'm sure as we lead into 2020 that the Elite will continue to showcase themselves as the Elite, as they do what they do best inside of the squared circle. And also, speaking of doing what they do best, we had Ortiz and Santana once again doing another beatdown angle. So let's hope that they continue to keep them fresh as they did here. They were kind of in the crowd. I think they might even had some Rick and Morty masks on beforehand. But they ended up attacking the Young Bucks and just kind of doing a quick cheap shot on them while Kenny Omega wasn't paying attention, and he quick ran him off. So that was a nice little quick spot, once again showing the kind of nefarious actions of the Inner Circle and the wreaking havoc kind of all across the card like NWO used to do over in WCW. So stringing things along, let's just hope that they manage the beatdown angles and the assaults and things in a way that makes them feel fresh by doing really cool things with them like they did tonight with the Rock and Roll Express and with the Young Bucks attack here. So let's hope that everything keeps going very well as it has so far with their handling of the Inner Circle. But as far as things they haven't quite handled so well, we had the Librarians come out, Peter Avalon and Leva Bates doing the shush thing and getting the heat, and Peter Avalon, God bless them and Leva Bates too. They're doing the best that they can with this librarian gimmick thing, but you can tell it's just not working. People are responding negatively in kind of a more of a hate kind of way, so hopefully they'll continue to back off of it. You can tell they're kind of using it as a comic relief sort of thing so far, now that they've embraced the fact that it's not working quite so well. And that was the case here also, as we ended up having Jon Moxley run through the crowd and kind of get pissed off with what he was seeing and interrupting it. So a nice little way to show his rebel nature and show the fact that he doesn't give a damn about what anybody is doing. He's going to come out and say what he's got to say, and this ended up being his previously announced spot for him to cut a promo with a live mic, and what a difference an unscripted promo makes on especially looking from Dean Ambrose to now being Jon Moxley again. He just feels refreshed and brand new when his promo works feel like they're dripping and oozing with passion, and you can just tell this is somebody so much in love with what they're doing and just putting everything they have into it, and that's a refreshing sight to see from him. All in all, a great promo about the now unsanctioned match that he's going to have with Kenny Omega. Probably going to be match of the night for Full Gear. But basically touching on the unsanctioned thing, as he mentioned at the opening of the television show, saying that he's unsanctionable, just him stewing and pacing around the ring angrily as he kind of spat venom with his words, and just really sold the kind of crazy, unhinged side that Jon Moxley has really showed as he's developed his character so far in All Elite Wrestling. And really, it just speaks to just what a generational star I think that Jon Moxley is and will become. I think he really has the sort of Rock and Steve Austin sort of feel when he comes out. It feels like a big deal whenever he hits the ring. His debut in All Elite Wrestling was handled so perfectly and handled like such a big deal, and justifiably so. And I think that he will be a huge win for AEW and will go down as maybe one of the biggest shifts in power in wrestling history, where you had the upstart kind of take over and take sort of Hogan, Rock, Austin style star and bring them over to their company and utilize them kind of in the prime of their career. Of course, you had Hogan jump ship to WCW, but he wasn't exactly in the top of his career. So this is much more the case of somebody shifting right at the top of their prime and really reinventing themselves in the process too, which is so unique and so special, and so many crazy stories that have happened when it comes to the development of this new promotion. So just some interesting stories, and I'm sure looking back on it, 20, 30 years from now, it'll just be such an interesting piece of wrestling history to look back and see the transformation from Dean Ambrose to Jon Moxley in AEW. But this segment delivered the goods, as just about everything has done when it comes to Jon Moxley and his character so far. So a great lead in to the main event that was mentioned previously, and just once again a great all-around show. Probably lingered a little slower pace in the first hour, give or take, of the show, but the way they picked up towards the end with the amazing Moxley promo and the great storytelling they had across the board with the Rock and Roll Express and Ortiz and Santana kind of constantly doing these little acts of heelishness. I think that it was still a great wrestling show, just a little slower paced, and I think kind of a little more of what you can expect to be the norm when it comes to a filler show. But like I said, this being the filler for AEW is almost a little absurd. It's almost just like looking at their AEW Dark and seeing the matches that they put on for that, and comparing them to what we get on television shows like with WWE and the match quality there. It's just such a crazy new revolutionary take on what wrestling can look like in the mainstream, and I think it's great to see it, and great to see them do it on such a grand stage. And let's hope that AEW continues to grow, and hopefully all of wrestling sees an increase and an uptick in the viewership numbers, although I don't think that the viewership numbers ultimately matter that much nowadays. But I think that so far AEW is winning the Wednesday Night War and is winning my fanship most definitely. I think that I get most excited for Wednesdays to come around, not just for doing this podcast, but also just as the inner wrestling mark, the inner wrestling nerd inside of me. So I think for now, that is all for this week. As always, for everything All Elite, I'm your host, Zach Perez, at Spots High on Twitter, where you can find my opinions in tweets, articles, and of course in podcast form. Always link you to wherever you can find it, and of course you can always find me on wherever you find your podcast from. Search for the WWE podcast, and then you will see the AEW Dynamite Aftershock podcast coming to your ears every Thursday. So once again, for AEW Dynamite Aftershock, I'm Zach Perez, and until next time, goodbye and good night.
Goodbye and good night.
Goodbye and good night.
Goodbye and good night. Goodbye and good night.